Onto the story now, where the South African Drug Policy Initiative says the Cannabis for Private Purpose Bill does not reflect the spirit of the Constitutional Court ruling that decriminalised the private use of dagga. The organisation says the requirements exclude the millions of South Africans who don't have the space to grow and consume cannabis in private. The initiative is pushing for legislation that aims to reduce the harms related to drug use while protecting the human rights of those who use the drugs. So for more on that story, we're joined now by the organisation's Dr. Keith Scott. Dr. Keith Scott, thanks a lot for joining us this evening. Your organisation argues that the Cannabis for Private Purpose Bill, as it stands, benefits affluent communities and the greater South African discourse. Can you elaborate on how so?
Yes, I can. Going back to the Constitutional Court ruling, the whole basis of it was to give people the opportunity to use cannabis in their private spaces. And the bill that's gone before Parliament actually excludes millions of people because its restrictions are so tight that it doesn't enable people living in small, cramped accommodation like shacks in crowded communities. It doesn't give them the opportunity to use or grow cannabis because A, they haven't got space to grow it, and B, the restrictions, according to the bill, make it illegal for people to smoke cannabis in a room or an poorly ventilated area where other people are living and where they object to it, and also if there are children in that room. And therefore, they have to go and smoke cannabis outside. But the problem is for millions of people, outside is on the street, which is a public area, which is also forbidden to actually use or even show people that you're smoking. You're not even allowed to display cannabis. So the bill is extremely discriminatory, and it affects the poor adversely because people there, if they break that law, they are at risk of being jailed for up to 15 years. Yeah. And so, it's obvious that that has to change.
Yeah, I mean, you also argue that the bill does little to reduce the scope for organised crime and corruption. What would be a more effective approach then? What does it look like?
Well, our recommendation, and it makes it, A, it's sensible, and B, it makes it easy for people to appreciate, is to simply follow the laws and regulations that govern the production and production, use and sale of alcohol. Now, alcohol is a far more dangerous drug than cannabis. There's absolutely no doubt about it. There's masses of evidence to show that. And yet, we actually encourage people to start businesses producing alcohol. What's more, and I'll give you an example. I mean, people with small wine farms, it's very easy for them to get a license. They can have tourism there. They can sell their wines. Bigger, people in the industry manufacture huge quantities of different types of alcohol. And then you get the artisanal businesses like craft beers and craft gins and that sort of thing. So the industry is open to the big and the small producer. And it also allows people to make alcohol in their own private spaces, and it doesn't really restrict how much people make. And the other thing about alcohol is most people buy alcohol. Very few people make their own alcohol. So all we're saying is put cannabis in the same legal structures as we have with alcohol. They're not foolproof. There's still harms, and we're trying to improve them. But at least it excludes the criminal element from the industry to a large extent.
Yeah. I mean, we're speaking about the bill also stipulating legal limits for personal use within the home or private space context. In fact, in some aspects, it's around the defining of private space. There's also the defining of the quantity, really, that is for personal use. So do you think that when looking at what the bill has stipulated, communities are actually adhering to these limitations? I mean, you're making reference to, for example, if you're smoking near a child, how much of a sentence you're actually looking at. But are people adhering to these limitations in the home context simply because you're not going to get exactly the police knocking on your door and thinking and trying to police how much of cannabis you consume within your private home space?
Well, that's one of the problems, that the police can actually knock on your door. If your neighbor complains, or somebody in your house, which is a crowded one room in many cases, if they complain, the police have to come and investigate. And so people who bear grudges, even corrupt police, they can plant cannabis on people. So the present bill allows a huge amount of corruption and exploitation, mainly of poor people, because obviously more affluent people have got the space. They've got more, if they are growing it in larger quantities, they've got legal assistance. So, you know, it all boils down to the fact that the law is based on punitive measures rather than a sane approach and a commercial approach to using this herb that millions of people use anyway.
Yeah. I mean, Dr. Scott, as we wrap up this conversation, economically speaking, does this bill risk at being exclusionary, where we're seeing that the richer will get richer and the poor will just continue getting poorer?
Well, I don't think, you know, if people adhere to the law, the rich aren't going to get richer unless they organize criminals. Then they are going to carry on with their trade. But it's certainly going to be even worse for poor people because they're going to be the scapegoats. And they're already persecuted in terms of possession and selling of cannabis. And it's not going to change. It'll only get worse.
Dr. Keith Scott, we'll leave it there for this evening. Thanks a lot for joining us from the South African Drug Policy Initiative on that matter.